This is one of my favorite videos, not just to film, but also to watch, because I love seeing how unhinged people can get when you put a book in front of us. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today we are going through my reading stats for 2022. 2023 has just started, so I've got a whole new year of reading ahead of me, but that does not mean that I have completely forgotten what happened last year. I'm going to pull stats from two places today. First one is going to be from Cawpile, which is a kind of a book recording spreadsheet that was set up by G from Book Roast. She makes a new set every single year, so I have been using the 2022 spreadsheet for the entirety of last year. And I'm also going to take a look at some of my stats from the story graph because I know that some of them can be a little bit different too. So let's get cracking. First off, the number of books that I read is 116. And that also means that I have got €116 in my little vault on Revolut that I can do whatever I want with. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. I think I'm just going to take myself into a bookshop one day and just go for it. I'm just going to buy as many books as my hand can carry. And if I have any money left over, that might be a miracle. In terms of the best and worst reading months, my best months were August and October, in which I read 14 books for both, and my worst reading month was September, in which I only read 4. I don't remember what happened in September. I think I was going through a massive reading slump. Maybe because I had read so many in October, I just took a little bit of a dip, but that happens. In terms of the pages read per month, the highest number that I read was in April, where I read 2,871, and the lowest was in September, where I read 1,091. Again, that kind of makes sense for September because I wasn't reading as much as I had read in any other month. I am a little bit surprised that August wasn't the highest. In terms of the hours that I listened to audiobooks, the lowest was in July, where I only listened to 10 hours of audiobooks, but the highest was in January, where I listened to 64 hours. I did read quite a lot of audiobooks in January. I do know that my first book of 2022, which was The Tiger That Came to Tea, that was definitely an audiobook, so I do think that I got the year off to a good start on that one. In terms of genres, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody that my two highest genres with 39 and 38 books were contemporary and romance respectively. But it actually does surprise me a little bit that my next highest was nonfiction. I did make a bit of a conscious effort, especially in November, to read a little bit more nonfiction than I usually had. So I am pretty impressed with how that has gone. But in fourth place was historical fiction with 11 books, and I'm actually surprised to see 2 fantasy books on this list. The most common book length that I had was about 351 to 400 pages, where it looks like I read about 33 of those. Then the next most common was 301 to 350, and then it kind of just staggers out between the rest of them. 350 to 400 is usually my sweet spot for books, so I'm not actually too surprised by how that has gone. But I do think that next year I'd like to read something that's a little bit longer. Talking about what format I read the books in, this was actually pretty surprising in that the most amount of books that I read were audiobooks. I read 42 audiobooks, 40 physical books, 31 ebooks, and 3 were mixed media, in that 3 had kind of text messages or emails or any kind of interactive thing like that. I think for one book I did read the physical book and the audiobook concurrently, so I counted that as like a mixed media book. But I'm kind of surprised that the most common was audiobooks. I had not expected that would be the forerunner. Then let's talk about the language. I read 115 books in English and 1 book in German. I also read 3 books that were in translation, one of which the original language was English, one of which the original language was Swedish, and one of which the original language was Japanese. In terms of publishers, the most books by a publisher that I read was from Penguin with 17 books. That kind of adds up. I know that Penguin is one of the biggest publishers in the world. I know that they have got hundreds upon thousands upon millions of titles in their arsenal, in their back catalogue, coming out this year, 2023. There are so many of them, so it's not really surprising to me that Penguin was the highest. The next highest then was HarperCollins, and I did kind of put them together in the US and the UK and the Ireland and all of that together. And then the next highest is HQ, which I believe is a digital only print, so I probably would have read a lot of those as NetGalley books. Speaking of which, 49 of the books that I read last year were books that I had bought myself and that I owned and that came out of my physical or my Kindle TBR. And then a further 30 of them were from Scribd, so I'm guessing that that's a lot of audiobooks. A further 16 came from NetGalley, which I definitely need to up next year. I know that I have really put my NetGalley to the side for 2022, and that is absolutely something that's not going to be happening in 2023. I got 10 books from the library. Most of them were audiobooks from BorrowBox from the library back here at home in Ireland, but I did get one book from my library in Berlin is a physical copy. And then 11 books were books that were gifted to me from friends. Let's get on to the spicy stuff, the star ratings. I'm going to do the full star rating and then I'm going to do the half star rating as G breaks it down. But the most common rating that I gave in 2022 was a 4-star, with 59 books getting a 4-star rating. 33 books got a 3-star rating, 4 books had 5-star, and 3 had 2-star ratings. In terms of half stars, again, 4 books had 5 stars, 35 books had 4.5 stars, 24 had just regular 4 stars, 23 books had a 3.5 star, and 10 books had a 3-star. And then, of course, you had the 3 books that just got a 2-star rating. For the publication date, 35 of the books that I read in 2022 were also published in 2022. 21 of them were published in 2021, 12 were published in 2020, 10 were published in 2019, 9 were published in 2018, 4 were published in 2017, and then the rest were years that kind of span back from there, all the way going back to the earliest book that I read, which was published in 1843. As for the age category, this does not surprise me in any way, but 97 of the books, about 84% of the books that I read last year were published intended for an adult audience. A further 13 books were published for a young adult audience, which doesn't really surprise me because I have really been taking myself away from YA books recently. I haven't gone to them at all a lot in 2022, so I'm not really that surprised by this one. And then there were 5 books that were written for a children's audience. I reread 14 books, and then the other 102 were books that I had read for the first time. I do like rereading. I like to go back now and then and see how the book has kind of affected me again. If I have kind of changed how I feel about it. For example, I've definitely changed how I felt about the Georgia Nicholson books. I don't think that if I was reading them for the first time as a teenager now, I don't think they would hit as well as they did back when I was younger. So it's always nice to go back to rediscover some books that you have read previously and just see if your relationship has changed with them. As for books that had LGBT rep, it's a pretty even split as to whether it did or didn't in the books that I read. And 32 of the books that I read did have an LGBT character in them, and then a further 25 of those explicitly had an LGBT character as the main character of this book. As for what their characters identified as, in 17 of the books there was a lesbian character, in 18 of the books there was a gay character, in 3 of them they were just noted as queer because their identity wasn't explicitly told. In 7 books, there were bisexual characters, and in 4 of the books, there were gay, bisexual, and trans characters. As for series or standalones, I read 71 books that were standalones and 45 books that were part of series. I started 23 series this year, I read 14 sequels, and I finished up 7 series this year. I read a total of 96 authors spanning the whole way across 2022. And of course, there were a couple of authors whose books I picked up more and more. For example, I read 4 Alice Oseman books. I read 3 of Alexandria Bellafleur's books. I read 3 of Lindsay Kalk's books. I read 4 of Marion Keyes' books. I read 2 from Portia McIntosh. And then there were others that had just kind of dotted themselves around the place. Again, the new or returning to authors was a completely 50-50, was almost a completely 50-50 split. I read 57 new authors and I returned to 59 of them. In terms of own voices books, 71 of the books that I read did not feature any own voices representation, whereas 45 of the books that I read did. In terms of what the gender identity of these authors were, 93 of the books that I read were written by women, 15 of them were written by a man, 3 of them were written by multiple authors, and 5 of them had a non-binary author. For the author's nationality, American was by far the biggest one. I read 48 books that were written by an American author. 37 of them were written by a British author. 20 were written by Irish authors. 3 were written by a New Zealand author. And 2, I believe, were written by an Indonesian author. And then there were other nationalities like Swedish or Japanese or Korean that were dotted around the place. Those are all of the most important reading stats that we need to go through for 2022. How many books have you got finished in 2022, or what is your reading goal for 2023? If you'd like to leave a comment but you cannot think of anything that you'd like to say, then just leave me the graph emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.